So tonight we're going to paint an apple. This is the example from which we'll paint from. So I'll be looking at this example and paint the apple. Now you guys will have to follow along. I'm thinking perhaps I could put my paper right here. And then if I were to take the apple right here, then you'd be able to see both. So that's what I'm going to do. The one thing I want to say is when putting an apple on a table, it makes it a lot more interesting if the edge of your table is 2/3 down from the top. So I have 1/3, 2/3, and the third is the table itself. So if you were to put the edge of the table where the table meets the wall in the background, in the middle, the composition would not be quite as strong. So I recommend always try to put this line here as either 1/3 up or 2/3 up, but never in the middle. So I'm just going to put a little mark here on my tape, and I recommend that you do the same. So this would be my mid mark right here, approximately. So 2/3 down would be approximately here. So I'm going to put a little mark here on my tape, which is not really happening. So I'm using my pen just to remind myself that this is the height at which I will put my table. So, and having a table that is straight across is always a good idea. It's very rare that the table will go like this or be like, let's say you'd have the table at one end would be here and the second part of the table would be higher. Even just a little bit, it will look a little funny. So try and make your table straight. You could also make it straight, but give it an angle. But for tonight, we'll just make that simple because our subject matter that we want to focus on is the apple itself. The background is just the background. And although I've painted the apple this size on this example, I suggest that you make the apple a big apple without touching the bottom or the top. The bigger you make it, then the more space you have to have fun to paint the apple. So we're going to make this, we're going to start very simply by painting, and we're going to do it slightly different from what I painted here. But we're going to start by wetting the circle where we're going to paint the apple. And then we're going to simply put a very light color of yellow. So using some clean water, and I'm using my Filbert just to show that a different brush could also work. So I'm going to wet my middle part. And then with a wet brush, and just a teeny little bit of paint. So I only gathered just a teeny little bit of paint because I want to do a very light yellow. I want to make sure it doesn't run, and it did run, but it will. So I just want to indicate where my apple is going to be. And I'm doing this with a very light yellow. So I'm making sure my apple is round and it's quite big. It's very hard to see on the screen, but if for any reason the size of your apple is not quite correct with this yellow, then you'll still have a chance to change it. So this is the first start. The yellow circle, that's what I've done. And that's what you need to do. I'll give you a couple of minutes to paint your yellow circle. So I painted the apple, as you can see here, very faint yellow. And the next step is I want to paint the wall behind the apple. I'm going to turn it upside down using a bigger brush this time. I'm going to use this size, and it's a flat brush. Round brush will also work. If you don't have a big brush, use the biggest one that you have. And I'm going to wet this background part with my big brush. And now I'm going to use green, just a little bit of green. And I don't know if you can see. So you can see I just put a little bit of green on my brush because I want to paint it green, but not too dark. So I want to do a very faint green. Now this is where the wall meets the table. It's got to be a straight line. Now I'm going to dip it in water, some more water, because I just want to have a faint green. Doesn't have to be very dark. As our first step. Here, this line, it's got to be completely straight, because that's where the wall meets the table, or the table meets the wall. All right. So now, because I'm going to turn it upside up, before I do, I want to make sure that I dry this surface here, because it's gonna tend to run. Once I've done this, then I can turn it upside up. Try this as well. All right, so I'm going to turn it upside up, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to do a light green background. So at this time, my background is dry because it dried while I gave you some time to paint. My apple is also dry, but it's a very light yellow. Now, before I paint the table, what I will do is I will look at my table sideways to make sure that this line matches this line. So I'm going to look at it from this angle like this to see that it's actually meeting. And for me, I have to look at it like this. So I realized when I did that, this side is a little higher. Now, another way to do this, if you have a ruler or a long brush, you can try to see if they line up. You can tell that they're pretty close as it is, but I can tell here that this is a little higher, a little higher than this one. So when I paint my table, it'll be my chance to make it to line them up. Now the table here, like I did up here, what I had done is I had mixed a little bit of green with a little bit of red with a lot of water. And we're going to do the same mix this time. So if I were to mix it, just to show you the color that I mean, I'm going to do my demonstration here on this. So I'm going to take just a teeny little bit of my green, and I put it here. Now a teeny little bit of my red. I put it here. And when I mix them, actually, there's too much red for the green. If I go like this. So now I have my red and my green. And if I were to add more water, then you can tell, especially if I show you closer to the screen, you'd be able to see that this is pretty much the color that I would be getting which is pretty much the equivalent of what I have painted here. So, and it doesn't need a whole big amount of it. Only a little bit like this will be sufficient. And at the end, we might paint it one more time. So this color is the color that I'm going to use to paint this. First, I'm going to wet it with clean water. So clean my brush first. And I'm wiping it on my paper towel. Now I'm using clean water. I'm going to wet this. And not when I'm wetting, I don't necessarily go right to the edge of the object, but when I paint, I do. So this is very wet, and I'm not necessarily waiting to paint it. I'm getting all this paint that I had prepared, this little mix, which is not a whole lot, and it's giving me a very light color, as you can see. That now I want to make sure that the table and the wall meet. So I'm making sure I'm not leaving any space in between. Same thing, I don't want to have a space in between my apple and my table. Even if you bite a little bit into the apple as you come around, it's better than to leave a white space. And here I know that my table is a little lower, so I'm biting a little bit into my wall to paint this. I ran out. So I'm just mixing a little bit more. And this makes this a little bit more red, but that's okay because it was still wet. And it's good. Okay. Now I have pretty much I have established all the different zones. My background, my apple, and my table. So with this, we have a very good start to create a beautiful apple. Now I want to bring your attention to something it's very subtle, but this section right here, you can tell that the table is wider than the wall. So as a result, the apple comes in like this, and then there's a little nick here before it continues. It's wider here. It's almost like if the wall is on top of the apple right here in this little area. Now, if this is the case for you, you can do the same as I will do right now, which is to try and erase a little bit of the wall. Imagine that. We can do that in watercolor. So what I do is I take a small brush. In this case, I use this one. You can use a round one like this. You can use, a flat brush like this. I just use this one because I just happen to have it. Now, what I did is I dried this brush as much as I can. It was in the water. I put it in the water. Now I dry it on my paper towel as much as possible by just wiping it on my paper towel like this. It's got to be a clean water paper towel. And then using this brush that is damp and dry, very dry and clean paper towel, I'll go here. I'm going to try and make this a little closer to the screen. So what I'll do is I'll go here like this. I'll just wipe it like this with my brush that is slightly damp. Now the wall has gone. And then if I use my paper towel to completely dry this. So now what happens is the meat between the table and the wall is very even. And the wall does not appear to be in front of the apple like it was before. See? So if you have any of this, then you can correct it that way. And another area, so if you have something like this, I'm going to show you another place. So right here, do you see how it goes in a little bit? Or like this. This is a good idea. Good example. See how this goes? It goes in instead of continuing the roundness. So I can do the same thing here. So with a slightly damp brush, I can just go like this. And it erases it. Now use a clean, dry towel. And now it no longer shows. So this is something that can easily be done at this time because my apple is very light in color. So when I do something like this, it doesn't really show, it kind of disappears. If I were to do it here, then it's will be a little bit harder. See, I try to do it over here. So here I have a little nick. I had one and I dried it a little bit. So I tried to use my damp brush. What happens now? There's no background. There's this white spot. Right? It's a little bit better than what it was when I had the nick. Right. Next step. Now we're going to attack this apple. And some of you commented that this little piece here did not come out like you wanted. Well, it's very important that this be like, it's almost like a little semicircle twice. And I think I'm going to get my drawing book to show you what I mean. So let's say I want to do an apple like this. So the apple is here. Now I have the stem that comes out this way. And in order for the stem to look like it's coming out of a little hole, it's important to have something like this. Shape that's somewhat like this. And so therefore, if this is a little darker, perhaps, then we'll have an apple. So this here, maybe if I put it closer. So this here is the shape that I meant. This is where the stem comes out of, and it will help to really read like the stem is coming out of a little hole. So in this case, I made it darker on the bottom, lighter on the top. This piece here, I did the same thing. So darker on the bottom with the red, and on the top, I had left it white, and then afterwards, I added a little bit of green. And of course, if the light comes from this direction, then the stem will cast a shadow on the background, not on the background, but on the back part of the apple, which is lighter. So this is a shadow. So these are things that help read this portion of the apple better. All right. Any questions about this? We shall continue then. So now we're ready to paint the apple red. Oops. And to do this, we are going to re-wet our apple. Now, in my case, I will do the same as I did here. The light comes from this direction and hit the apple from the left here. And this is why the apple is casting a shadow on the right-hand side on the table. Because the shadow is so short, that means that the light is coming from quite high and hitting the apple like this. If I had a long shadow like this, that means the light would be coming more from the side, like so, and hitting the apple like this, casting a longer shadow. It's like when it's 5 p.m. and you're walking on the street, your shadow will be a lot longer than if it's 1 p.m. where the sun is up above and you're just casting a very short shadow. Same thing. All right, so we're going to try to aim for the same amount of light as there. And we are now going to make this apple red. And I suggest in this part of the demonstration that you watch what I do and then you try it afterwards when I give you some time. So using my filbert, if you have a round one or a flat one, they all will work fine. Eventually you will decide for yourself which is the brush you like the most to paint with. I'm putting it in my clean water. And now I want to make sure I don't have too much water. I'm going to wet this nice yellow circle that I had created without wetting the background or the table. And now I'm going to use some of my red. I'm not using too much of it. And I'm going to start painting the apple. Because it's already wet, it's bleeding, which is nice. It's creating a nice effect. I know that this side is the side that is the shadowy side. I'm going like this, going all the way to the table, all the way to the wall. Oops. And now I want to have a more watery kind of effect here. So I dipped it into water without adding more pigment. I don't have to necessarily cover all of this yellow. And in some cases, now I'm putting my brush in the water, drying it on the paper towel. In some cases, I'm going to want to remove some of the pigment with my damp brush. Now I'm drying it again on the paper towel. So this is what I'm doing. I'm removing some pigment while it's still wet. And this way, it will not create the sharp edges that would appear if it was not still wet. If it was dry. Sorry about my English sometimes. Now I'm going here and I'm giving it some shape. And I can always put it in the water, dry it on the paper towel some more, and remove a little bit more pigment if I want to, like so. Over here. Now I've given it a little bit of shape, and it's very important to also give it the little divot here. So the divot is like a little something like this. It's almost like a bird. This will be the shadow, almost. See how I'm painting with the side of the brush? It's not necessary to always paint with the tip. Here, making sure that I'm going all the way to the edge. Oops, too much pigment. Go back here.
And Claire, you're just using the red. You have not used any other color.
Exactly. So I've only used the red. And now the result is this. Here in the middle, it looks yellow because I had the yellow under and I didn't go over this part. So now the result is this. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this part. Now that we have given some shape to our apple, and hopefully you guys were able to also give it the little bit of a shape here of, you know, where the stem will come out of, we're going to repaint the background. The background here is what enhances the apple. Now the green and the red are two colors that if you were to make them the darkest that you can, so if you were to make your red the darkest you can and the green the darkest you can, they would be of equivalent tones, as opposed to if you have like a yellow and a purple. Well, the yellow, the darkest that you can, will never be darker than the purple, because the purple is a very dark color and the yellow is it's our lightest color that we have. So now we have to decide if we want to make this green very dark or not too dark. Because the light is coming from this direction, hitting the apple this way, we'll cast a shadow here. The apple on this side will not be the darkest red, whereas the apple on this side will probably turn out to be a little darker. So almost the darkest. As a result, we want to have a little slightly lighter background on this side where the apple will be the darkest, slightly lighter background on this side where the apple will be the lightest. So we're going to go from dark to light. If I turn it upside down, I hope I didn't confuse anyone. Now the light is coming from this direction, going to cast a shadow here. So the light is hitting here. This is the lightest area of the apple. So this will be where I put the darkest for my background. And this is where the darker area of the apple. So this is where I'm going to have a slightly lighter background. The method is the same. So I'm going to demonstrate. If you feel like you want to do it at the same time as me, go ahead. But I'm going to wet this whole area. And I'm going to start here with a nice green, going to lighter green here, almost like a lime green, maybe a little yellowish. But in this, I'm going to also incorporate some red because I don't want to have a pure green in the background. So I wet my background on top of this green that I have already painted before. Because it was such a light layer, it doesn't matter if it erases. Now I want to get a lot of pigment on my brush. Don't know if you can see very well that I have a lot of pigment on my brush. And now I'm painting with, this is the dark side, like the dark side of the moon. That was a very good song. I really like that song. I want to paint quite fast because if I paint too slowly, then it's going to have time to dry in between. Now I'm dipping a little bit into my red. Look at this. Gives me some nice highlights. And I'm doing this while it's still wet. I've created a slightly lighter green that I'm continuing. See, this green has a little bit more yellow in it. Some preparation for this. I did prepare a slightly lighter green in which I'm going to put just a tinge of the red, not too much. And I have also prepared a lime green, which is a lighter color, as you can see, that I'm going to put here. Ooh, look at this beautiful color. Now, I want to make sure I don't leave a space between the apple and the background. And I also want to put a little bit of red in this section here. Ooh, very red. That's quite interesting. So I don't want to go too close to my apple with the darker colors. And now, before I turn it upside up, I'm going to dry the border all the way around so that it doesn't drip. Now, if for any reason it seems like you have water that accumulated here at the bottom, you can always use a dry brush and pick it up with a dry brush like this. This will pick up the excess water if you have any. You can go like this. But I didn't have any, so it didn't do much of anything. I'm drying the sides. There. Now I'm going to turn it upside up. And you can tell now that this side has more of a pure green. Coming around it's a green that has more yellow in it, so it's a warmer green. And it will respond well when I put the darker red on this side. This next step now will be to repaint our apple. This time we're going to use a dry brush. And then after we've done this, then we're going to add the stem and repaint our table, and we're going to be done. Now, to do this work with a dry brush, I like to use a brush that is maybe about this size, a little bigger actually. Would be nicer. Where is it? Oh, this one. This nice round one would be good. A little bit bigger than this would also be better. And I can use my filbert, of course, but the filbert accumulates so much water that I tend not to use this one to do the dry brush. So I'm going to use this one here. And now, as you can see on this one here, there are areas here that are very dark. And this area here, which is also very dark, it actually has a mix of the red with a little bit of lime green in it. So I'm going to mix the red and the lime green. How do we make lime green? It's a lot of yellow with just a teeny little bit of blue. So what is the difference between lime green and green? So this is more like a lime green color, whereas the green is more like something like this. So as you can see, this and this are two different colors. Now, if I were to use a little bit of red, so the red is, the alizarin crimson is a very cool color, red. But if I put a little bit of lime green into this red, so now I'm using a little bit of lime green and I'm putting it into this red. Now what happens is, so this is alizarin crimson right here without the lime green, this one. And this is the alizarin crimson with the lime green in it. And you can tell how with the lime green, it becomes a warmer, almost an orangey color, but it still remains dark, especially here at the bottom. So we will do this mix. I'm actually going to use my flat. I'm going to use my flat. Why not? I'm going to use my flat. So now using my flat brush, which is dry, it's actually damp. I have dried it on my paper towel as much as I could. And now using some red that is, it's still quite wet. You can see now I'm going to use this and dry it on my paper towel like this. Then I'm going to use my brush and paint with it. And it's not running at all. I want to remake that little thing here like this to welcome the stem. Now I want to also put a little mix of my red with some lime green. So I have this red here. I'm going to use some red lime green, mix it with it. Gives a little bit of a warmer color. I'm going to use this up here as I come down. Maybe a little bit on this area here. And down here, which now is becoming more like an orange color, but it's very interesting. And more like here. Right. So now I have this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the lime green and put it right here. And then I'm going to put my stem coming out from here. So to do this, I'm going to switch to, oops, I put it upside down in my water. Now that is something I've never done before. I'm going to switch brushes, use this smaller brush, use a little bit of my lime green, not too much, and put it right here. Give it the shape that I want. And then to make the nice brown color for the stem, I'm going to use red with green. So if I mix the red with the green, where is my little, here it is. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So if I mix the red, so this is my alizarin crimson right here. And if I put some green into this red, so I wash my brush and now I dip it into the green. Look what happens. nice warm brown. See? So this is a perfect color for my stem. So that's what I'm going to use. And making sure that this area is very dry because I want to have a nice sharp line for my stem. Mix a bit of red and green. And now I'm going to put my stem right here. The stem is usually a little wider at the top for some reason. So now I have my stem coming out of the little area there that I created. Now that I've done that, I'm ready to repaint my table, but I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes to do your apple. So to repaint this nice table here, we will be using, well, I will be using a large brush. You can use the flat. I'm going to use the large or the medium-sized filbert paint. And to do so, I'm going to first wet my table all the way to the apple, or close anyway. And then for the table, I want to have a nice mix of red and green, or a red and lime green. So you can use the stem color, or you can use a nice mix of your red and lime green, which is what I'm using, to give a nice warm brown. And I'm making sure that I'm painting all the way to the apple. I don't want to leave a white spot there. All the way to the wall. So I'm making sure that I'm painting these colors very nicely. Not too dark though. Although the bottom part could be a little darker than the top, because as the table comes towards us, it tends to be a little darker. Like so. So now I'm going all the way to my wall on this side. Like so. All the way to the apple. Now I need to make sure that I add my shadow. So with even more of the green into my red, that'll give me a darker color. Now I'm going to paint a shadow right here. Shadow is like a semicircle, like this. And because I'm painting the shadow while the table is still wet, it gives me a soft edge to the shadow. I think it's pretty good. Just going to go a little dark here. Sometimes the shadow tends to be darker closer to the object, like so. And if you let this dry flat, then it will give you a nice, interesting result. Because the watercolor tends to create some special effects as it dries.